The word violence is a vibrant and entropic one.
The use of physical force so as to injure, abuse, damage, or destroy.
8 letters that evoke a plethora of images.
Intense, turbulent, or furious, and often destructive action or force.
Each one unique to the person who hears it.
An instance of violent treatment or procedure.
For such a grim and visceral word, it's one that evokes colorful imagery. Whether it's the rough grays and browns littered in a first-person shooter video game, a simple gang tag on an inner-city wall, the carnage of an 80s slasher film, or even just a simple rosary, a reminder of Christ hung up on the cross, where blood and water flowed from his sacrifice. No matter how you slice it, violence is both black and white and steeped in color, with its imagery, motivations, and especially its consequences. Though violence these days is often just seen as a trope, it's a means to an end, and especially in entertainment, where it's a spectacle to partake in, find adrenaline, glory, and even meaning. And while it is meant in good fun, oftentimes we can end up a bit cold and desensitized because of it. When we watch a movie like John Wick, seeing Keanu Reeves operate like a special forces agent, tearing down his enemies like a machine built specifically to do so, we don't often think anything more of it. To us, this is just fantastic choreography and visceral fun to see our hero figure take down the bad guys. But that's the thing. When violence is taken outside the realm of fantasy, we're exposed to something much more tragic and real. All the Hollywood fun and endorphin-raising pleasure is zapped away, and we're faced with something that just makes us feel wrong.
NBC2 has live team coverage of the match.
It was a nightmare crime. 2 12-year-old girls stabbed their friend
here in New York.
The motive, a sacrifice to a macabre fictional monster known as Slender Man.
Now the word that something was seriously wrong came from this power plant in eastern Sweden. Workers coming on the job registered abnormally high levels of radiation on their body.
When we compare to how it's portrayed in media, true violence is an absolute contrast. When it happens, it's like a hurricane, thrashing and destroying all in its wake, leaving nothing but misery and dread. Soldiers don't become one-man armies taking on thousands of enemies just to survive unscathed and make it out a hero. They maybe at most in real life kill 1 to a handful of people at most, sometimes none at all, and just get caught in some crossfire or an intense situation, only to make it home to be treated like trash and suffer with PTSD. As much as we as players enjoy games about visceral carnage like Doom, it's a far cry from what the real thing is like. So that begs the question: are there any games that actually try to show violence in a more honest and real way? There have been a handful of games who have attempted to show us what violence is really like. sometimes in a preachy and cringe-inducing way like The Last of Us 2, other times in a way where it throws the grief and regret right in our face like Spec Ops: The Line. But in 2011, we did get an unlikely release, and one that would encapsulate this theme better than any other game has before. And that game would be Kane Lynch 2, Dog Days.
Oh, come on! Can't you see I've been born? And now I'm crawling out the glass without a hint of a face. They say I can't go to the mall. My body's gonna stick to the walls. But I could never carry it out. And I'm still waiting for the call.
Dog Days is a simple game. It's an escape story. No grandiose adventure, no rags to riches, or even righteous vengeance. Just a job gone wrong and a bum rush to escape impending doom and to live another day. The game opens up roughly 2 years after the first game, with Kane returning to his life as a hired gun, and Lynch becoming a member of a crime syndicate made up of various expats who are now operating in China. He now takes medication for his mental health issues, and outside of his life as a criminal, he lives a relatively normal life with his girlfriend. The story opens up when a smuggling job is on the table and Kane and Lynch reunite, since Kane is the man for the job. What is hinted at being a reunion of old war buddies in the prologue is shown to just be a bitter and unfriendly venture, which starts off rocky, and when what was supposed to be a simple chore along the way goes wrong, the game's events truly start. One of the pair ends up shooting the girl that was pulled along in the pursuit. While it is slightly hinted that Kane is the one who pulled the trigger, both characters take responsibility for what happens, and unknowingly prompt the horror of the game's story to truly start. The story then jumps to the next day where everyone's in a car, talking and getting acquainted, in what should be a simple scene of the characters talking about the details of the job, though this is quickly interrupted by an all-out assault of what appears to be rival gangsters. And that's when the situation takes a bit of a turn. What should have been just a small gunfight or a brawl turns into a struggle for survival. The environment around us starts to change as well, looking less like a city of crime and more so like a post-apocalyptic nightmare. And to only make things more apparent that this isn't the action game that was advertised, this is what the game sounds like. There's no action-packed, high-octane adrenaline music. Instead, it's a horrifying soundscape, built from the bottom up to be uncomfortable, backdropped by guns that sound far louder and more distorted than almost any other game, with even the explosions just sounding like blasts of noise. All this takes place while the camera constantly shakes and stutters, with light flares everywhere and digital JPEG corruption clutters the entire screen, in some cases causing the entire thing to become glitchy and unintelligible. And that's when it should dawn on you that Kane Lynch Dog Days isn't an action game. It's a horror experience. It's the personification of violence.
Let him go! Lynch! Don't fucking kill you!
Okay, let's take a step back. In order to understand Dog Days, we do need to have a basic understanding of the original game, Dead Men. Kane Lynch's original outing couldn't be a greater contrast from what would come with Dog Days. Just about all the elements in this title are a stark contrast. While it's still a game about two pricks playing the anti-hero and fighting hordes of enemies in an ugly story about an even uglier world, Deadman tries to humanize the characters more and present the entire experience as a more traditional action game. It has a normal camera, average gunplay, and a world setting that looked like your average Modern Warfare era shooter.
I got some ammo if you need it.
Steeped in the staple browns, grays, and whites that everything else just looked like at the time. All with shooting galleries that aren't special in the slightest, and in all honesty, if it wasn't for the fact that the game played like hot garbage, it wouldn't even be remembered. The story of Dead Men attempts to emulate a dark action film reminiscent of what you would have seen in theaters during this era, with Kane Lynch being death row inmates and on their way to execution. Lynch, a stranger to Kane, helps him bust out of prison in order to escape their situation. It turns out that Lynch had been hired by the Seven to break out Kane, a former member of this mercenary group who's tasked with acquiring money that the Seven claims that he stole from them, and if he doesn't, his family will be executed along with him. As you would come to expect, this plan isn't as simple as it sounds, and goes wrong pretty quickly into the game, when the violent schizophrenic sidekick that is Lynch has a violent episode where his psychosis takes over and he kills the hostage they need to get ransom money. And that's all the story that you really need to know. Besides, Lynch was originally supposed to betray Kane to get a spot in the Seven, but obviously things went awry and our buddy cop duo was formed. Deadman attempts to do the same blood-soaked action shtick as every other third-person shooter of its era was, the only gimmick being that you played as two unlikable assholes gunning after even more unlikable assholes. Hollywood exploitation of schizophrenia and psychosis in our wife-killing sidekick, and a failed Max Payne wannabe being our playable character who's supposed to have some sort of tragic downfall that we never actually care about because, unlike Max Payne, he's just a fuck-up. Like I said, if it wasn't for the game being bad and the controversy of how hard it was shilled by GameSpot just for a reviewer to fairly criticize the game and then get axed for doing his job, it's one that would have been lost in the realms of obscurity as just another run-of-the-mill shooter. But there was one aspect that made the game somewhat unique. A big part of what sells Kane Lynch is the protagonists themselves. They aren't your average heroes. Hell, even in terms of playable villains or anti-heroes, they don't match the archetype much either. These two are fat, balding, unlikable, and foul-mouthed in a way that doesn't come across as cool or badass.
I fucking hate heights. What are they for? Nothing serious, it's just for my stomach. Been taking them since forever. It's...
Just pick up the damn rope.
Fuck! Shit. Where did they come from?
Fuck. I must have heard the shots. Let's get down to the exit.
Oh fuck, just what we need. Still wanna rappel down?
In fact, they're beyond just the salt of the earth. Their entire selling point is that they are incompetent, bottom-dwelling scum. And even at the surface, the duo hints this with their basic traits. They look and sound like your average middle-aged burnout, and their attitudes match perfectly. Impatient, impotent, irritable, all with no real excuse for it besides they're just assholes. Kane is an ex-mercenary who started out his life as a simple family man working as a cop. The old one bad day trope happens to him, and his son dies. The tragedy leaves him destroyed and to fall down the oh-so-familiar path of self-destruction, becoming a gun for hire and working for various crime organizations, most importantly the previously mentioned Seven. He more traditionally fits the bill as the villain who didn't start off evil, but fell down that path due to the pain and loss he endured in life. What makes him stand out is that despite his proficiency as a mercenary, he was still a relative fuck-up, and his actions would lead to the death of 25 civilians in Venezuela. This incident would lead to his arrest and the eventual sentencing to death, kicking off the events of the first game. Now, Lynch, on the other hand, is a lot simpler of a character. Lynch is just a psychopath, one who deals with mental problems and anger issues, with his original backstory just being that he ran some warehouse in Detroit and was convicted as the killer of his wife. Overall, he's just a rambling, hot-headed psycho who's proficient with dealing in death. A character more or less designed to be a stand-in villain or predictable bad guy in a shockingly low-budget crime film. These two characters are the epitome of stale, and they match their appearance perfectly. They aren't even meant to be seen as anti-heroes. Simply put, Kane and Lynch are anti-protagonists. Unlikable, irredeemable, and as for the case of Dog Days, the cause of the entire game's conflict, purely because of their hot-headed nature.
Okay, you done? Now come on, let's talk. Hey, relax.
What just happened? Did he just... What the fuck just happened?
You just shot his girl, Kane.
The fuck I did!
Yeah, let's get your luggage. Shit. I gotta think of some story to tell Blazer.
This same theme of dysfunctional and anticlimactic plays directly into their relationships as well. Kane and Lynch are not a dynamic duo or two kindred spirits fighting their way against odds that outweigh them. They aren't enemies that come together when they need to stop a common threat and use their alliance as means to do so. Rather, Kane and Lynch are co-workers. People that may be friendly in moments and in the heat of things show the closest thing to concern to one another as possible, but at the end of the day, they're just that. Co-workers, stuck doing jobs together, and when it's time to clock out, they don't speak another word or pay any mind to each other until it's time to clock in and do it all over again. And this is portrayed perfectly during their first meeting in Dog Days.
Lynch?
Kane, welcome to Shanghai. Long fucking flight, huh? It's good to see you. Been a while. How you been? Well, here, let me get that.
I'm fine. It's okay. Thought I was supposed to be picked up by,
Yeah, Glazer. Yeah, we're seeing him tomorrow.
That's good. A few things I'd like to go through with him.
Yeah. This way.
You know, I see a few problems with the deal that need to be looked at.
Sure. How's your daughter?
She's fine.
I mean, after what she went through...
I said she's fine, okay? Don't start fucking around.
Okay. I'm sorry. It's going down Thursday morning. Glazer picks us up tomorrow for briefing.
That's good.
Even when attempting to follow basic formalities, they just can't find any real chemistry. That only comes when it's time to take lives. But Kane and Lynch's own broken relationship at least has an attempt at being friendly. Shu, Lynch's girlfriend, is the only person in the entire game who shows any sort of true compassion or friendliness. She's a woman who fell for Lynch simply for him being a kind gentleman, implying that such things were alien to her, which makes her entire role in this story all the more tragic, as outside of Shu, the rest of the cast sees them at best as screw-up losers, and at worst, bugs to be squashed, with even their own employers selling them out at a certain point.
Hey, am I glad you made it? Ready to make some money?
Yeah.
Fucking wanker. No! Both of you. Bloody morons!
What?
Shut it! Cost me everything. Shits. I could... Why do we even bother? You bloody retard! You know the shit I've gone through in the last couple of days? No! Because you're fucking idiots! Because of you, I have got nothing! You made me sick.
Now, with everything we've talked about so far, all of this just sounds like a recipe for disaster. A first outing that was just a dime a dozen game with terrible gameplay, a nihilistic story of bad things happening to bad people, terrible characters we're forced to play as. Well, all of that is kind of just the point. This would be a recipe for disaster if it wasn't for the most important element to the Dog Days experience.
Can't you sleep?
It's just this. My old friend Kane flies in tomorrow.
Oh, that sounds nice. Should we all go out for dinner? Lynchy? Lynch?
This is the intro to the game. And from the first second, we get an idea of just how this whole thing is going to play out. Dog Days is one of the most disorienting games that I have ever played. The perspective isn't just from a third person, it's from a found footage perspective. Our eyes into this world is from the lens of a cheap digital camera of an unnamed man following the duo throughout the entire game. And this perspective changes everything. From the storytelling, to the way we perceive these events, to how the world looks to us. The random cuts and jumps in time no longer feel like Hollywood magic or even a cinematic tone. They're now explained away as just the times when the camera is off, grounding more of what is happening into the world that we exist in. And this is something you might not even recognize on a conscious level, but your interpretation of these events are more subconscious, and this is all due to the way that it's presented and shot. It's also why things feel so much more visceral. The way that Dog Days looks can completely be explained by the camera, as it resembles the way most footage of battles and violence used to look back in the 2000s. It was far more common during that era to not just see camcorder footage of battles and experiences in Iraq pop up online, but even things as horrible as cartel violence and executions. You would see it all over websites like LiveLeak, early YouTube, and all sorts of other seedy areas of the internet. All through what we like to call the potato camera. But it wasn't just old war and cartel footage. Even just watching videos of people out at events like Warped Tour or other music festivals where the footage was pixelated and warped with audio that would go from tinny and thin to pure noise on a whim. That's just kind of how everything was in this era. On top of this, the game presents its censorship using this aesthetic as well, by covering up nudity and excessive wounds with pixelated censors, like the ones that you would see on news programs or even shows like Cops, bringing an even greater amount of immersion by using visuals that we often associate with things that are shot in the same format. Dog Days takes all of this and puts it into an action game. When you move, the camera shakes and wobbles. When you shoot, it stutters and the audio distorts, booming with loud, inaudible noise. Bright lights create flares, causing the already dingy and unclear visage to become even more disorienting. Now, add on to this that Kane Lynch are constantly outmanned and outgunned, and outside of specific moments, the whole game lets you feel like you're taking on impossible odds in an assault, making you feel like you're prey being hunted, running and fighting to survive like a rabbit evading a pack of wolves. This is doubly so when we take in the audio side of things. I mentioned a few times already how the guns and explosions distort and destroy the audio, but I only briefly mentioned the music. The score behind Dog Days is nothing short of haunting. It's the biggest piece of the puzzle in terms of cementing the horror that the game bathes you in. So why don't we fire up YouTube and take a listen to the music we find in the game. Not what you would really expect, is it? Well, this is just a sweet and upbeat pop song from China. Well, here's what it sounds like in the game. All the licensed pop songs are diegetic, and for those of you not familiar with the term, what is diegetic sound? Diegesis has its roots in literature and theater. The other side of the coin is called mimesis. Basically, it's the difference between telling how a story unfolds or seeing the story unfold. The term diegetic sound comes from film techniques in sound design. Diegetic sounds are those sounds that on-screen characters experience. This whole take on all the traditional music that we hear only being heard through the speakers of cars, stores, and restaurants only submerges us deeper in Dog Days' atmosphere, as if they're a small window of normalcy as we make our way through one carnage-fueled section to another. Now, the actual music that you hear as background sounds more like this. This is the type of music you would expect to hear in a game like Manhunt, or even a survival horror game like Siren. It's eerie and droning, oppressive by all means, and when paired with the game's visual style, it's callous and graphic, even violent. What really makes all of this stick is the story, or really the lack thereof. As I stated earlier, the whole kickoff of the game is the reunion of Kane Lynch. Kane, now working as a mercenary again, coming to Shanghai to meet up with Lynch in order to do a smuggling job. Lynch, the character portrayed as a Hollywoodized trope of the crazy schizophrenic killer, is now much more well-adjusted as a person, now medicated and working in the only field someone like him could exist in, and now enjoying a relatively quiet life with his girlfriend outside of his work. The setup and even some of the game's trailers make it seem like this is going to be a big heist story, something that would be a logical next step after Dead Men. But instead, we get a story that's just as dysfunctional as the characters, atmosphere, and the game's mechanics. After the pair kill the girl at the beginning of the game, it causes a chain of events to unfold like a downward spiral of despair and destruction. With each level, we see our characters fall deeper into a pit that they have no real hope of escaping. That girl was actually the daughter of a corrupt politician, who not only holds a lot of power and controls the corrupt police force and even the military, but is one of the head honchos most of the gangs bow to. From here, there is no grand adventure or smuggling job, just a constant stream of worse and worse situations where we as the player are prey being hunted, now running for our lives and desperately trying to find a way to escape a situation. Kane stays mostly stuck being angry about his job being lost, for the most part not even caring about how Lynch's life, that he had worked so hard to rebuild after everything he had already suffered through in the past, is burning in flames. The game's most iconic and intense scene is the climax of Lynch's fall. Halfway through the game, we reach a mission where we have to save Shu from being captured, which we fail and end up being captured ourselves. And that's when this happens.
Let him go!
This scene is intense. The outright barbarity of our characters, sliced to shreds, naked and afraid. Lynch resolving himself to death, and Kane screaming in a rage, pleading for mercy. It's haunting, especially with its setup. Before anything is shown, we hear a muffled recording of audio right before the camera comes on, where it's implied that Lynch was not only forced to see Shu suffer the same torture, but was also for finally being killed. An act that breaks the final semblance of normalcy and any hope that Lynch had left in the world. And it's only after this that the camera turns back on, and we witness the torture and pleading of our duo mentioned before. But it's also here where a subtle yet powerful storytelling device appears. As our cameraman's camcorder comes to life, it's originally focused not on the subjects, but on another camera, set up on a tripod by our captures. This easily overlooked piece of storytelling implies the depths of this world's depravity. It's a meta view that recontextualizes the entire game. We can assume the cameraman isn't actually there and it's just a meta device used to convey the game's style and aesthetic, but it's here where we see just how deeply the cameras play into what's actually happening. We the players are here seeing the game through the eyes of the cut-up footage taken from the events that unfold. But this camera belongs to someone else. Whether it's recording for personal use of the torturer, or even a recording for the politician whose daughter was killed so he could see the horrific torture for himself, the camera is the embodiment of violence. Everything that we've sat through, of death, despair, and depravity. And while all these things obviously predate the camera, here in this world, the camera changes the meaning of all of these things. Because rather than it just being another part of the world as it is in ours, here, the camera embodies the fact that it's being framed, captured, edited, and sent out for consumption. But I guess that's the entire point, isn't it? A large part of the game's identity is its overall message. While it's never explicitly stated, one of the easiest conclusions to make is that Dog Days is a critique of violence in media, specifically video games. While the video game market today is still filled to the brim with shooters and action games, the tone of most titles these days is a far cry from what came back in the late 2000s when Dog Days was developed. Games these days, at least in the AAA sector, are far more commonly rooted in arcadey, lighthearted aesthetics like Fortnite or Overwatch. Military shooters are a lot less common these days outside of staples, but even then, they're much more fantasy-esque than they used to be. I mean, you can play as Alucard and even Nicki Minaj in Call of Duty these days. Whereas back in the late 2000s, the atmosphere was much different. Sure, you had your sci-fi fantasy type games like Halo, Mass Effect, or even the Devil May Cry series, but those games are rooted in their fantastical elements, not in violence and tragedy, where the shooter market, on the other hand, was just callous.
Remember, no Russian.
Well, I'm not going to sit here and preach about how these games are evil, as I love many of them just the same as everyone else. There is something to be said about how series like Call of Duty, Battlefield, and even the Mercenaries games turned real-life tragedy and horrific depictions of wars and conflicts, with many of them standing in the real world, and warped them into glorified shooting galleries where we are almost always the heroes, justified in taking the lives of thousands of NPCs, being one-man killing machines, feeling no remorse, regret, or any weight for the actions that we commit. It's, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, it's Hollywood movie fun. Something for us to take the spoils of victory and feel like badasses and, in a way, even desensitize ourselves to what could be seen as exploitative and ugly subject matter. A game that really fits as an antithesis to what Kane Lynch would be is Army of Two. It's another buddy cop third-person shooter with a dynamic duo fighting their way through hordes of enemies. But these guys are the opposite. Rather than being irredeemable, unlikable killers who constantly create their own problems due to their inability to do anything right, we play as two badass soldiers. Two bros who kick ass and take names and overcome unbeatable odds and save the day at the end of the game. Kane Lynch is a direct critique of this very idea, which is why it's kind of funny how Kane Lynch actually predates Army of Two, with the original game Dead Men trying to do the same thing that Army of Two does. And I think it's the failure of that game that caused the writers and devs to take such a different approach with the sequel. Rather than just try to force this duo to become a dark-sided Army of Two, why not use these irredeemable bastards to make a statement and say something that no one else was willing to do at the time? And rather than make a soapboxy game about it and preach and try to force the player to hear a sermon that they never wanted to hear, why not just create an experience that encapsulates all of it? With every element of the game going out of its way to be ugly, distorted, frustrating, disorienting, and self-aware.
Coming with you. Look at us. We screwed it all up. Why do people always die around us?
The final act of Dog Days wraps its message up in a nice little bow. After surviving the horrors that we talked about before, the pair begin to embody that Hollywood badass role and take on the military and police in an uphill fight to take out the man who had been behind all the terror Kane Lynch faced. Although the entire time it still feels futile. Even when defeating and narrowly escaping all that they had faced, it's ultimately still meaningless. This isn't a triumphant moment. There's no glory, just regret, wounds, and the maybe desire to live another day. And our final mission in the game shows this in spades, as just about everyone we had killed thus far has been a gangster or a corrupt police agent or military thug. In this final stretch, we're just harming innocent civilians and terrorizing airport security. People who probably have no idea who we are. We're no longer the prey just trying to survive and fend off predators. We are now the wolves preying on the rabbits. With the final moments of the game showing just how ugly this entire world is, as Kane Lynch hijack a jet and leave the cameraman to die. Dog Days is a game that means something. It's an experience that's not meant to be fun or even traditionally enjoyable. It's a piece of art built from the ground up to be an ugly, disorienting experience from start to end. One that will leave the player with a point about violence. And rather than give you a preachy game that asks you to sit and let it belittle you, Kane Lynch Dog Days decided to bathe you. It decided to bathe you in the aesthetic of violence. Now, with all that being said, this is my wall of shame. The spot where we name and shame everyone who loves throwing their hard-earned cash at a YouTuber trash like me. I couldn't thank them enough for all their support that they give me, and their support goes farther than anything else. If you would like to see your name up here or just show some support for my content, you can do so by donating on Patreon or Ko-fi. Links are in the description. But with that being said, subscribe, follow me on Twitter, join the Discord server, and I'll see you in the next video.